The wind cut through downtown Chicago like a knife. 16-year-old Tommy pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders as he crouched behind the dumpster in the narrow alley. The cardboard beneath him was already soaked from the afternoon rain, but it was better than the cold concrete. 8 months. That's how long he'd been living on these streets. 8 months since he turned 18 and aged out of his last foster home. 8 months of learning which doorways offered the best shelter, which restaurants threw out food that was still good, and most importantly, how to stay invisible. Tommy had gotten good at being invisible. Real good. Especially when police cars rolled by. He'd learned early that being a young black man on the streets meant trouble found you even when you weren't looking for it. So he stayed hidden, stayed quiet, and minded his own business. The alley behind Murphy's Diner was one of his regular spots. The kitchen staff usually tossed out decent leftovers around 9 o'clock, and the brick walls blocked most of the wind. Tonight felt different, though. Colder. The kind of cold that made your bones ache and your teeth chatter no matter how many layers you wore. Tommy checked his phone. 7:30. Still had time before the dinner rush ended and the good food came out. He'd found the cracked phone in a subway station 2 weeks ago. The screen was barely hanging on, but it still worked. These days, having a phone meant everything. It was his connection to the library's Wi-Fi, to job applications, to the small hope that things might get better. A police officer walked past the mouth of the alley. Tommy instinctively pressed himself deeper into the shadows. He recognized this. "Caution, sir." Officer Rodriguez walked this beat most evenings. Unlike some of the others, Rodriguez had never hassled him directly, but Tommy wasn't taking any chances. He'd learned that being noticed by police, even the decent ones, usually led to questions he couldn't answer, without revealing he was homeless. The officer continued down the sidewalk, his heavy boots echoing off the wet pavement. Tommy relaxed, slightly. Just another routine patrol. Nothing to worry about. That's when he heard it. A strange sound. Like someone dropping something heavy, followed by a weird gasping noise. Tommy froze. He knew he should stay hidden. Every survival instinct he'd developed over the past 8 months screamed at him to keep quiet and stay put, but something about that sound made his stomach twist. He waited. Listened. The gasping came again, weaker this time. Slowly, Tommy crawled to the edge of the dumpster and peered around the corner. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. Officer Rodriguez was on the ground about 20 feet away, clutching his chest. The big man was on his side, his face twisted in pain, struggling to breathe. His radio had skittered across the sidewalk, just out of his reach. His hat lay upside down. In a puddle, Tommy's first thought was to run. Every fiber of his being told him to grab his stuff and disappear into the maze of alleys he knew so well. Getting involved with a police officer, even a hurt one, could only lead to trouble. Questions about where he lived, where his parents were, why he was out here alone. But then the officer made another sound. A weak, desperate wheeze that reminded Tommy of his grandmother in her final days at the hospital. Before the cancer took her. Before the state shuffled him from one foster home to another. Before everything fell apart. When someone needs help, you help them, his grandmother had told him during one of their last conversations. Doesn't matter who they are or what they look like. That's what separates us from the animals, baby. We take care of each other. Tommy closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This could ruin everything. But he couldn't just watch someone die. He emerged from behind the dumpster, his hands shaking from more than just the cold. The officer's eyes were squeezed shut, his breathing shallow and rapid. Tommy had seen enough medical shows to know what a heart attack looked like. "Sir?" Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, can you hear me?" The officer's eyes fluttered open. They were filled with pain and confusion. Tommy could see him trying to focus, trying to understand what was happening. "I'm going to help you," Tommy said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Just stay calm." He looked around quickly. The street was surprisingly empty for a Tuesday evening. A few cars passed by, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene, but none stopped. A couple walked by on the other side of the street, too, wrapped up in their conversation to notice anything was wrong. Tommy reached for the radio, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar device. He'd never used a police radio before, but he'd watched enough cop shows to have a basic idea. He pressed what looked like the talk button. "Hello? Hello, there's a police officer down. He's having a heart attack." Static crackled from the radio. Then a woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Who is this? What's your location?" Tommy looked around frantically for a street sign. It's downtown, behind Murphy's Diner on State Street, near the alley. He needs an ambulance right now. Unit 47, respond to Murphy's Diner on State Street. Possible officer down. EMS en route." More voices crackled through the radio, but Tommy wasn't listening anymore. The officer was trying to say something, his lips moving weakly. Tommy knelt down closer. "What? What are you trying to say?" My wife," the officer whispered. Tell her I'm sorry about the argument." "You're going to tell her yourself," Tommy said firmly. "You just need to stay awake until help gets here." He remembered something from a first aid class he'd taken at one of the community centers years ago. Keep the person talking, keep them conscious, don't let them slip away. "What's your wife's name?" Tommy asked. "Maria," the officer gasped. "Married, 15 years next month." "That's a long time. She must be pretty special." The faintest smile crossed the officer's face. "She is. She's everything." Tommy could hear sirens in the distance now, getting closer. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. Help was coming. The officer might actually make it. "See? Told you," Tommy said. "You're going to be fine. You'll make it to your anniversary." The officer's hand reached out weakly, and without thinking, Tommy took it. The man's grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he whispered. "Whatever your name is." "Thank you." The sirens were loud now, very close. Tommy could see the flashing, lights reflecting off the wet buildings. In a few seconds, this alley would be full of paramedics and police officers, and they'd want to know who he was, where he came from, why he was here. "What's your name, son?" the officer asked. Tommy hesitated. Giving his real name meant entering the system. It meant questions and paperwork and possibly being sent back to a group home. But looking down at this man who might die without help, he found himself telling the truth. "Tommy," he said quietly. "My name's Tommy." The ambulance rounded the corner, its lights painting everything red and blue. Tommy squeezed the officer's hand one more time. "Remember to tell your wife you love her," he said. Then he melted back into the shadows, becoming invisible once again. But this time he wasn't hiding from trouble. He was hiding from gratitude he wasn't sure he deserved. Tommy pressed his back against the cold brick wall, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The alley was now flooded with flashing lights and the sounds of people shouting orders. 2 paramedics rushed past his hiding spot, carrying equipment he couldn't identify. "Patient is conscious but weak," one of them called out. "Pulse is irregular. We need to move fast." From where he crouched behind a pile of old crates, Tommy could see them working on Officer Rodriguez. They had him hooked up to machines, oxygen mask over his face, IV lines running into his arm. The whole scene looked like something from a medical drama, except this was real. This was life or death. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" A younger police officer was asking questions, notebook in hand. Rodriguez's voice was muffled by the oxygen mask, but Tommy could hear him trying to speak. "Kid. There was a kid who helped me, called it in." Tommy's stomach dropped. They were looking for him. Of course they were looking for him. He'd used the police radio. There would be records, recordings, evidence that someone else had been here. "What did this kid look like?" the officer pressed. "Young. Maybe 16, 17. Black kid, thin, looked like he'd been living rough." Tommy wanted to disappear into the wall. Living rough. That's exactly what he looked like, because that's exactly what he was doing. He pulled his jacket hood up higher and stayed perfectly still. "We need to get him to Chicago General now," one of the paramedics announced. "His condition is stabilizing, but he needs surgery." They loaded Rodriguez onto a stretcher, the wheels clattering against the uneven pavement. Tommy watched as they slid him into the ambulance. All those machines beeping and humming. The officer's wife was probably at home right now, maybe watching TV or doing dishes with no idea her husband was fighting for his life. The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing again as it disappeared into the Chicago traffic. But the police officers didn't leave. 3 of them stayed behind, shining flashlights into every corner of the alley, looking under dumpsters, checking doorways. "Hello? Anyone out here?" one of them called. "We just want to talk to whoever helped our officer. You're not in trouble." Tommy almost believed him. Almost. But he'd heard those words before from other cops, other social workers, other adults, who promised things would be different this time. "You're not in trouble" usually meant you were about to be in a whole lot of trouble. He waited in the shadows for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, the officers gave up their search and left. The alley returned to its usual quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional siren. Tommy's hands were still shaking as he gathered his few belongings. The cardboard he'd been sitting on was completely soaked now, useless. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the granola bar he'd found that morning, but the dinner rush at Murphy's Diner had been interrupted by all the commotion. No leftover food tonight. He made his way through the maze of back streets and alleys toward the bridge where he usually slept. It wasn't much, but there was a dry spot under the concrete where the wind couldn't reach. Tonight, though, the walk felt different. Every police car that passed made him duck into doorways. Every siren in the distance made his heart race. What if Officer Rodriguez didn't make it? What if he died at the hospital? Would they blame Tommy? Somehow. Would they say he should have done more, acted faster, called for help sooner? Under the bridge, Tommy spread out his sleeping bag and tried to get comfortable on the hard ground. The concrete was cold against his back, and the sounds of the city echoed strangely in the hollow space. Cars rumbled overhead, their headlights occasionally sweeping across the support beams. He couldn't stop thinking about the officer's face. The pain, the fear, but also something else. Gratitude. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? Like he mattered? Like he'd done something right instead of something wrong? His phone buzzed. A text from the library's automated system reminding him that his computer time was reserved for tomorrow afternoon. Tommy stared at the cracked screen, thinking about the college applications he'd been slowly filling out. Community college was about all he could afford, and even that seemed impossible most days. How do you put homeless as your address? How do you explain the gaps in your school records when you'd been moved from foster home to foster home? Sleep came in short bursts. Every sound made him wake up, listening for footsteps, for voices, for signs that someone had found his hiding place. Around 3 in the morning, it started raining again. Not heavy, but steady enough that water began dripping through cracks in the concrete above. Tommy pulled his jacket over his head and tried to find a drier spot. As he shifted his position, he thought about his grandmother again. She would have been proud of what he did tonight. She always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they did when someone needed help. "You got a good heart, Tommy," she used to tell him. "Don't let the world make you hard. Don't let it take that away from you." It had been 2 years since she passed. 2 years of group homes and foster families who treated him like a paycheck or a burden. 2 years of being told he was difficult, angry, a problem child. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was all those things. But tonight, for just a few minutes, he'd been something else. Tonight, he'd been someone who saved a life. The next morning brought gray skies and the smell of rain on concrete. Tommy's back ached from sleeping on the ground, and his stomach felt like it was eating itself. He packed up his few belongings and started walking toward the downtown area where he could usually find day labor jobs or at least places to stay warm. As he passed the newsstand on 5th Street, something caught his eye. The morning paper had a headline that made his blood run cold. "Police officer suffers heart attack during downtown patrol." Tommy bought the paper with some of his last change and read the article quickly. Officer Rodriguez was in stable condition at Chicago General Hospital. He was expected to make a full recovery thanks to quick action by an unknown Good Samaritan who called for help. An unknown Good Samaritan. That's what they were calling him. The article mentioned that police were still looking for the person who had helped, wanting to thank them personally. It included a quote from Rodriguez's wife, Maria, saying she was grateful to whoever had saved her husband's life. Tommy folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. He wasn't sure why he kept it. Maybe because it was proof that what happened last night was real. Maybe because for once he was part of a story that had a happy ending. As he walked toward the library, Tommy made a decision. He wasn't going to hide from what he'd done. He wasn't going to feel guilty for helping someone. His grandmother had been right about people taking care of each other, but he also wasn't going to go looking for thanks or recognition. He'd done what anyone should do, nothing more. Officer Rodriguez was alive, and that was enough. What Tommy didn't know was that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Because sometimes doing the right thing sets off a chain of events that comes back to you when you least expect it. Sometimes saving someone else's life is the first step toward saving your own. 3 days later, Officer Rodriguez opened his eyes in the cardiac unit of Chicago General Hospital. The first thing he saw was his wife's face, red with exhaustion and worry. Maria had been by his side since the ambulance brought him in, catching short naps in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "Hey there," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Welcome back." Rodriguez tried to speak, but his throat was dry from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. Maria helped him sip some water, and slowly his voice returned. "How long have I been out?" he asked. 3 days. "You had us scared there for a while. The doctor said if help hadn't come when it did." Maria's voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Rodriguez's memory came flooding back. The crushing pain in his chest, falling to the ground, the feeling of drowning while breathing air, and then a voice, a young voice telling him help was coming, telling him to stay awake. "The kid," Rodriguez said suddenly, trying to sit up. "There was a kid who helped me. Where is he?" Maria gently pushed him back down. "Danny, you need to rest. The doctor said, you can't get worked up." "I'm not worked up. I just need to know what happened to the person who saved my life." Dr. Patterson, a friendly woman in her 50s, came in to check on him. She explained the surgery, the blocked arteries they'd cleared, the medications he'd need to take. But Rodriguez barely heard any of it. His mind kept going back to that alley, to the scared young man who could have easily walked away but didn't. "Doctor, there was someone who helped me before the paramedics arrived. Do you know anything about that?" Dr. Patterson shook her head. "The paramedics said the scene was empty when they arrived. Just you and the officer who responded to the radio call. That didn't make sense. Rodriguez knew someone had been there. Someone had called for help using his own radio. Someone had talked to him, kept him conscious, maybe even kept him alive." The next day, against both his doctor's orders and Maria's protests, Rodriguez convinced his partner, Officer Chen, to bring him the case file. It wasn't much. The radio call had been recorded, but the voice was hard to make out. Young, male, nervous. The caller had given the location but no name. "Danny, you need to let this go," Maria said as he studied the few pages of notes. "Someone helped you, and that's wonderful. But you almost died. Focus on getting better." But Rodriguez couldn't let it go. That night, as Maria slept in the chair beside his bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about his life. 15 years as a cop. 15 years of seeing the worst of humanity. Drug dealers, gang members, domestic violence calls that ended in blood. He'd become cynical, expecting the worst from people. And then this kid, this homeless kid, living in the shadows, had risked everything to help him. No reward expected, no recognition sought. Just one human being helping another when it mattered most. Rodriguez was released from the hospital a week later with strict instructions to rest, take his medications, and avoid stress. The first thing he did was convince Chen to drive him back to the alley behind Murphy's diner. "This is crazy, Danny," Chen said as they pulled up to the curb. "What are you hoping to find?" Rodriguez didn't have a good answer. He walked slowly, around the area where he'd collapsed, looking for any clue about his mysterious helper. There wasn't much to see. The rain had washed away any footprints. The dumpster sat in its usual spot, overflowing with restaurant garbage. He talked to the staff at Murphy's Diner, but none of them remembered seeing anything unusual that night. He left his business card with them anyway, asking them to call if anyone came forward with information. Over the next few days, Rodriguez developed a routine. Against Maria's wishes, he would drive downtown during his recovery time and walk the streets. Not in uniform, just in regular clothes, looking for a young black man who might be living rough. Chicago had thousands of homeless people. The more Rodriguez looked, the more he realized how invisible they were to most people. He'd walked these streets for years as a cop, but he'd never really seen them. Not as individuals, not as people with stories and dreams and families. He started carrying granola bars and bottles of water, handing them out to anyone who looked like they needed them. Most people were suspicious at first. A middle-aged Hispanic man asking questions and offering food wasn't exactly normal on the streets. "I'm looking for someone," he would tell them. A young guy, maybe 16 or 17, he helped me when I was hurt. Some people just walked away. Others took the food but didn't offer any information. A few were willing to talk, but none of them knew anything about his rescuer. Rodriguez visited homeless shelters, talked to social workers, even went to the library where he heard young people sometimes went to use computers. He showed a sketch artist's drawing to anyone who would look, but the description was too vague. Thin, young, wearing layers of old clothes. It could have been dozens of people. Chen thought he was losing his mind. "Danny, you're turning this into some kind of obsession. The kid obviously doesn't want to be found." "Or maybe he's scared," Rodriguez replied. "Maybe he thinks he's in trouble." Maria was more direct. "You almost died, and instead of being grateful to be alive, you're wandering around the city chasing ghosts. What if you have another heart attack out there?" Rodriguez tried to explain, but how could he make them understand? This wasn't about duty or gratitude or even saying thank you. This was about something deeper. That kid had restored his faith in people at a time when he'd almost lost it completely. 2 weeks into his search, Rodriguez was sitting on a bench outside the downtown library when he overheard a conversation between two social workers. "The worst part is when they age out," one was saying. 18 years old and suddenly they're adults, but they've got nowhere to go. No family, no support system. A lot of them end up on the streets. Rodriguez thought about his rescuer. Young, maybe 16 or 17. What if he was older than he looked? What if he was one of these kids who'd fallen through the cracks? That evening, Rodriguez sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook. Maria was making dinner, occasionally glancing over with concern. "What are you writing?" she asked. "A list," Rodriguez said. "Places to look, people to talk to, youth services, foster care agencies, group homes." Maria turned off the stove and sat down across from him. "Danny, I love you, but this has to stop. You're making yourself sick over this." Rodriguez looked at his wife, this woman who'd stood by him for 15 years, who'd sat by his hospital bed for 3 days straight, who was now watching him chase after someone who might not want to be found. "What if it was our son?" he asked quietly. They'd never been able to have children. It was a sadness they'd learned to live with, but it never really went away. What if some kid saved our boy's life and then disappeared? Wouldn't you want someone to look for him? Wouldn't you want someone to care? Maria reached across the table and took his hand. Our hypothetical son would have parents who loved him. He wouldn't be living on the streets. This kid might have parents too. Somewhere. Or he might have nobody. Either way, he saved my life, Maria. He gave us 15 more years together, maybe more. How do I just forget about that? Meanwhile, across the city, Tommy was trying to do exactly what Rodriguez couldn't. Forget about that night. But it was harder than he expected. Every time he saw a police car, he thought about the officer. Every time he walked past Chicago, General Hospital, he wondered if the man had made it through surgery. He'd started avoiding the downtown area where it happened, taking buses to different parts of the city to look for work. But Chicago wasn't that big, and the streets all connected eventually. Tommy didn't know that someone was looking for him. He didn't know about the sketch artist's drawing or the visits to shelters. He was focused on survival, on making it through, each day on trying to save enough money to get a real address so he could apply for jobs. What he definitely didn't know was that his life was about to change forever. Because sometimes the people you help don't just say thank you and move on. Sometimes they change their whole world to find you. And sometimes when they do find you, everything you thought you knew about your life turns out to be wrong. 3 weeks after that cold November night, Tommy was sitting on the steps of the downtown library when he noticed the man watching him. It wasn't unusual for people to stare at him. Being homeless made you invisible to some people and a target for others. But this was different. This man wasn't looking at him with disgust or pity. He was looking at him with recognition. Tommy tried to ignore it at first. He had bigger problems to worry about. His phone had finally died completely 2 days ago, and without it he couldn't access the Wi-Fi to work on his college applications. The library closed in an hour, and he still needed to finish the essay for the community college scholarship. But the man kept watching. He was sitting on a bench about 50 feet away. Hispanic, maybe in his 40s, wearing casual clothes. Not a cop uniform, but something about him seemed familiar. Tommy's survival instincts kicked in. When someone paid too much attention to you on the streets, it usually meant trouble. He gathered his backpack and started to walk away, but the man stood up too. Now Tommy was sure he was being followed. He quickened his pace, weaving through the afternoon crowd of people leaving work. The man stayed with him, not running but keeping the same distance. Tommy ducked into an alley between 2 office buildings, planning to lose his follower in the maze of back streets he knew so well. But when he looked back, the man was still there, close enough now that Tommy could see his face clearly. That's when it hit him. The eyes. He recognized those eyes. "Wait," the man called out, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "Please wait. I'm not going to hurt you." Tommy froze. The voice was stronger now, healthier, but it was the same voice that had whispered about his wife that night in the alley. "You're the cop," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Officer Rodriguez smiled, and Tommy could see tears forming in his eyes. "And you're the kid who saved my life." For a moment, neither of them moved. Tommy's first instinct was still to run. Being found by a police officer, even one he'd helped, could only lead to complications. Questions about where he lived, where his parents were, why he wasn't in school. "I'm not here as a cop," Rodriguez said, as if reading his thoughts. "I'm here as someone who owes you everything." Tommy looked around the alley, checking for exits, old habits dying hard. "How did you find me?" "I've been looking for 3 weeks, every day. I was starting to think I'd never see you again." "Maybe that would have been better," Tommy said quietly. Rodriguez stepped closer, slowly, like he was approaching a scared animal. "Why? You saved my life. Don't you think that matters?" Tommy shrugged. "You were hurt. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've been a cop for 15 years, kid. I know how most people react. When they see someone in trouble, they walk away, they don't get involved, but you did. I just called for help. It's not like I performed surgery or anything." Rodriguez laughed, wiping his eyes. "You did a lot more than that. You stayed with me. You kept me conscious. You talked to me about my wife. Do you know what that meant?" Tommy didn't answer. He was still trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of trap. "What's your name?" Rodriguez asked gently. Tommy hesitated. He'd already told him once in the alley, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Tommy, I'm Officer Rodriguez, but you can call me Danny, and I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," Tommy said. "You would have done the same for me." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, thinking about that. Would he have? 3 weeks ago, before the heart attack, if he'd seen a homeless kid in trouble, would he have stopped to help? Or would he have seen just another problem, another headache to deal with? "Maybe," he said honestly, "but you didn't hesitate. Even though you had every reason to stay hidden, you chose to help. That takes courage." Tommy shifted his backpack to his other shoulder. "Look, I'm glad you're okay and everything, but I should probably go. Where? Rodriguez asked. Where do you live, Tommy? There it was, the question Tommy had been dreading. Around, he said vaguely. Rodriguez looked at Tommy's worn clothes, the overstuffed backpack, the thin frame that spoke of too many missed meals. He thought about the past 3 weeks of searching homeless shelters and talking to social workers. He thought about all the young people he'd met who were trying to survive on the streets. You're homeless, he said. It wasn't a question. Tommy's jaw tightened. So what if I am? That's not illegal. No, it's not. But it's not right either. How old are you? Old enough to take care of myself? That's not what I asked. Tommy sighed. There was no point in lying now. 18. Just turned 18 8 months ago. Aged out of foster care? Tommy nodded, surprised by how much this cop seemed to understand. Rodriguez felt his heart breaking. This kid, this brave young man who'd saved his life, had been living on the streets for 8 months, while Rodriguez had been recovering in a warm hospital bed with his wife by his side. Tommy had been struggling just to survive. Listen, Rodriguez said. I want to help you. Tommy laughed bitterly. Right. What are you going to do? Arrest me for being poor? I want to help you get back on your feet, really help you. Why? Tommy's voice was defensive now. Because you feel guilty? Because you think you owe me something? I told you you don't owe me anything. Rodriguez thought about how to explain it. How do you tell someone that they changed your entire perspective on life? That they made you remember why you became a cop in the first place? 3 weeks ago, I was having the worst day of my career, he said finally. I'd just broken up a domestic violence call where the woman refused to press charges. Before that, I'd arrested a kid not much older than you for selling drugs because he said it was the only way to help his little sister eat. I was angry at the world, angry at people, angry at a system that seemed broken. Tommy listened, not sure where this was going. And then I had a heart attack. I thought I was going to die in that alley, and you know what my biggest regret was? That I'd wasted 15 years being cynical. That I'd forgotten there were still good people in the world. Rodriguez's voice got stronger. And then you showed up. A kid who had every reason to hate cops, who had nothing to gain by helping me, who risked his own safety to save a stranger. You reminded me that there's still hope in this world. Tommy didn't know what to say. He'd never thought of himself as hopeful. Most days he felt like he was just trying to survive until tomorrow. My wife and I, Rodriguez continued, we've been married 15 years. We always wanted kids, but it never happened for us. Maybe this is why. Maybe we were meant to help you instead. I don't need charity, Tommy said quickly. This isn't charity, this is family. The word hit Tommy like a punch to the chest. Family. He hadn't had a real family since his grandmother died. Foster families didn't count. They were temporary, business arrangements. But this man was talking about something different. I don't understand, Tommy said. Rodriguez smiled. Come have dinner with us tonight. Meet my wife. Let us say thank you properly, and then we'll figure out how to help you build the life you deserve. Tommy looked at this man who'd spent 3 weeks searching. For him, this man who was offering him something he'd thought was impossible. For the first time in 8 months, Tommy felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. He felt hope. 6 months later, Tommy stood at the podium in the community center, looking out at a crowd of people he never could have imagined meeting. Local news cameras were rolling. City officials sat in the front row, and dozens of homeless youth filled the plastic chairs that had been set up for the occasion. A year ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, Tommy began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I thought my life was over before it really started. I thought nobody cared whether I lived or died. The room was completely silent. Tommy had gotten better at public speaking over the past few months, but this was his biggest audience yet. Then something happened that changed everything. I helped someone, and they helped me back. But what we built together is bigger than either of us. Tommy looked toward the back of the room where Officer Rodriguez sat with his wife Maria. They were both smiling, and Maria was wiping tears from her eyes. Next to them sat Dr. Williams, the social worker who had become like a mentor, to Tommy and Janet from the Youth Services Department who had helped him navigate the system. Today we're opening the Second Chance House, Tommy continued. It's not just a shelter. It's a place where young people who aged out of foster care can get back on their feet. A place where they can finish school, learn job skills, and most importantly, know that someone believes in them. The applause was thunderous. Tommy waited for it to die down before continuing. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. That first dinner at Rodriguez's house had been awkward and overwhelming. Tommy had sat at their kitchen table, uncertain and defensive, while Maria fussed over him like he was a lost nephew. She'd made enough food for 6 people and kept piling more on his plate every time he took a bite. "Danny told me what you did," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "You gave me my husband back. You gave us our future back." Tommy had stayed in their guest room that first night, then another night, then a week. Rodriguez had used his connections to help Tommy re-enroll in high school as an adult learner. Maria, who worked as a nurse, had helped him get proper medical care for the first time in years. But the real surprise came when Tommy expressed interest in emergency medical services. The experience of helping Rodriguez had sparked something in him. He wanted to learn how to really save lives, not just make emergency calls. "You've got natural instincts," the EMT instructor had told him after his first week of training. "Have you ever thought about making this a career?" Tommy had thought about it constantly. For the first time in his life, he had a goal that felt achievable. Rodriguez helped him apply for scholarships, and Maria helped him study for his GED. When the acceptance letter came from the community college's paramedic program, Tommy had cried for the first time since his grandmother's funeral. But Tommy couldn't forget where he'd come from. As he settled into his new life, he kept thinking about all the other kids still sleeping under bridges, still aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. He started volunteering at homeless shelters, and that's where he met others with similar stories. There was Kevin, who'd been living in his car since turning 18. Lisa, who was couch surfing with friends and trying to finish high school. David, who'd been on the streets for 2 years and had almost given up hope of ever having a normal life. What if we could do something bigger? Tommy had asked Rodriguez. One evening, they were sitting on the back porch, Rodriguez recovering from his second day back at work. The doctor had cleared him for light duty, and he was easing back into police work. "What do you mean? What if we could help more kids like me? What if we could create a place where they don't have to choose between sleeping on the streets or going back into the system?" Rodriguez had looked at this young man who'd become like a son to him. Tommy had not only turned his own life around, but he was already thinking about how to help others. "Tell me more." That conversation had led to months of planning, fundraising, and paperwork. Rodriguez used his connections in the police department and city government. Maria reached out to her network of nurses and healthcare workers. Tommy shared his story with anyone who would listen. The local news picked up the story first. "Homeless teen saves cop's life, gets second chance." The reporter had been expecting a simple feel-good story, but what she found was much more compelling. Here was a young man who'd not only overcome incredible odds, but was now working to change the system for others. Donations started pouring in. A local businessman who'd been homeless as a youth contributed $50,000. Churches, community, groups, and individuals sent money, supplies, and offers to volunteer. The story went viral on social media, inspiring people across the country. "This is incredible," Rodriguez had said as they sorted through the latest batch of donations. "I never imagined it would grow this big." "Neither did I," Tommy admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking this is all a dream." But it wasn't a dream. Within 6 months, they'd raised enough money to lease and renovate a small apartment building. The Second Chance House could accommodate 12 young people at a time, providing them with temporary housing while they finished school or job training. Now, standing at the podium for the grand opening, Tommy looked out at the faces in the crowd. Some were supporters and donors. Others were young people who would be among the first residents. All of them were part of something bigger than anyone had imagined. "People ask me what the most important thing is that we're providing here," Tommy said. "Is it the housing, the job training, the counseling services, and yes, all of those things matter. But the most important thing we're giving these young people is something I didn't have when I was sleeping under that bridge." He paused, thinking about that cold November night that had changed everything. "We're giving them hope. We're telling them that their lives matter, that their future matters, that someone believes they can succeed." In the audience, Rodriguez felt his heart swell with pride. This young man had saved his life in more ways than one. Tommy had reminded him why he became a cop in the first place: to help people, to make a difference, to be part of the solution. After the ceremony, as people toured the renovated building and met the staff, Tommy found himself alone with Rodriguez and Maria for a moment. "I don't know how to thank you," Tommy said, "for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Rodriguez put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. "You don't need to thank us. You've already given us more than we ever gave you. How do you figure that?" "You gave us purpose," Maria said. "You gave us the family we always wanted, and you've shown us that sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones most capable of helping others." As the evening wound down and the last visitors left, Tommy walked through the empty building that would soon be home to 12 young people who'd aged out of foster care. Each apartment was small but furnished with everything someone would need to start rebuilding their life. On the wall in the main lobby hung a simple plaque: "In memory of all the young people who didn't get a second chance, and in honor of those who refused to give up hope." Tommy touched the plaque gently, thinking about his grandmother, about all the foster kids he'd known who hadn't made it this far, about the version of himself who'd been sleeping under a bridge just 6 months ago. Tomorrow, the first residents would move in. Young people who'd been sleeping in cars, couch surfing, or living on the streets would have a real address, a real chance to build something better. And it all started with one act of kindness on a cold November night. One scared kid who chose to help a stranger, and one grateful man who refused to.